Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Now, it is September 17th, 2018 right now, and we are approaching the anniversary of the disappearance of Joan Risch, which occurred in October of 1961. I believe October 24th. 1961 was the exact day, so it's just over a month away, and in that time I'm hoping to discuss the case a little bit more. Really, I just wanted to kind of go over one very quick possibility today regarding the disappearance of Joan Risch, because I've done a handful of uploads on this channel, so I'm not going to go back and rehash the whole story, but just in case this is the first one that you've ever heard on this channel, Joan Risch was a woman who disappeared as we said, October 24th, 1961, from her home in Lincoln, Massachusetts. She left behind her 2 children. She had a baby upstairs in the bedroom. There was blood found all over the kitchen. There is, a bloody handprint on the wall that people couldn't identify. Someone had tried to clean up the blood. There were no bloody footprints. And that's it. We don't know what happened to Joan. That's a very, very big nutshell version. I know I just didn't want to retrace all the steps because I wanted to talk about something very, very specific today. And this actually comes to us from Martin Risch, the husband of Joan, who was also the father of her children. I mean, Martin Risch had his alibi confirmed, and people do not think that he was involved, but Martin Risch is the one who said, his own personal theory that he believed that his wife, Joan Risch, suffered amnesia, and she had amnesia or some sort of psychological break. And I remember reading that, quote from him, and I was just like, wow. I mean, I think that would explain a lot. Is this what this is? Is this a woman who suffered some, sporadic blood loss? Or maybe even calculated blood loss? Is this woman who just suffered a lot of blood? Because she lost about 1 cup of blood. And, we've talked about some of the responses that people can have when they lose large amounts of blood. I mean, one person who had a miscarriage, and not saying that Joan did have a miscarriage, but, if she did, one person who had a miscarriage said that she actually went blind for a period of time. And someone else just pointed out to me when I was first discussing this case that if you lose a cup of blood, you can pass out and you can have, all kinds of traumatic things going on. Well, the big thing to say about this is that what this is, just a case of super intense amnesia? Well, I was also remembering the case of Benjamin Kyle, about a man, who was found, naked behind a Burger King, to be honest. And, he just could not remember absolutely anything about himself. He couldn't remember most of his name. He couldn't remember, where he had lived, and he slowly got some of it back over time, and he was able to remember that his name was Benjamin, but he couldn't remember his last name or his social security number, and it stayed like that way for years. So, is it possible that Joan was just suffering a very intense case of amnesia, and that's why she never returned home? Because I found it very interesting that Martin Risch would suggest that he thought his wife was still alive. And when I do the next sort of Q&A thing on Joan Risch, one of the commenters that we'll get into stated very clearly, I don't think Joan died in a construction pit. Because that was actually a theory that I would say that I supported when I first heard about this case. I was entertaining the notion of a miscarriage, or possibly an abortion, something of that nature, and that Joan wandered out of the house in disorientation, and she died in a nearby construction site, like she fell into a construction pit. I was entertaining that possibility, and as I did my uploads for this channel, I had to sort of kind of retrace and backtrack, and I didn't quite come to the same conclusion after making about 5 or 6 uploads. I began to change a little. But did Joan survive, or did she die the day of her disappearance? That's one of the age-old things that people are really trying to debate and go through, and just trying to figure it out to sort of genuinely solve the case. One of the big things, though, that we have going on with this one is absolutely no contact. there are two possible sightings of Joan, as we mentioned. She was seen on a highway. If some woman was. The biggest thing we have to remember about the bloody sightings are this was not definitively Joan, and people are not necessarily always sure what they've seen. And a lot of the theories that I've noticed from other YouTubers and just other people who've been writing about the case online, they seem very contingent upon those bloody sightings, of a woman walking by a highway with blood running down her legs. They seem very set that their theories are contingent upon that was definitely Joan, and that there definitely was a bleeding woman there. It's just like, we don't have that 100% certainty. But what I think Martin Risch is going at is, it's sort of like he believes that somehow his wife, suffered this injury, whether it was an abortion, a miscarriage, or even something, like the, injured in some other way. That's kind of beside the point now. He thinks that this blood loss caused either a psychological break or serious amnesia, where she just forgot absolutely everything about herself, and she just ended up somewhere else. Now, in all likelihood, is this feasible? With the amount of people who have been looking into this case and with the amount of, sort of press that had gone around, wouldn't somebody have noticed that, hey, is that you? Are you this Joan Risch person that people have been talking about? Well, the answer to that is just simply not necessarily, because I've also covered the case of Marcia King on this channel, and that was an instance where somebody disappeared, and the short story is she was found dead on the side of a highway in 1981, but her mother waited in the same house, for what has it been now? 37 years to get the answer. It's like her mother never left the same house, never left, never changed her phone number, and she was just like waiting to find out what happened to her daughter. And there was an enormous amount of publicity around that. USA Today did a whole giant spread on that case, about who was this unidentified body that was found on the side of the highway. And, yes, this is the Buckskin Girl case. Somebody scolded me for referring to her as the Buckskin Girl because we know her name now. But it's like, the point is, I just wanted to be certain, make sure people know who I'm talking about. But the point is, just because there's an enormous amount of media coverage, especially in print media, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone is going to connect the two dots and, be like, oh, holy crap, that's me, or holy crap, that's my family member, and just because there's an enormous amount of publicity around a case, that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is going to be able to bring back the memories or to find out about it, or they're going to hear about it at all. Because, just because Joan had amnesia and people were talking about this case and writing newspaper articles about it, that information wouldn't have necessarily made its way to Joan if she did survive this. It's like, when I did an upload on this channel called Joan Risch Conclusion, I was sort of really, really leaning toward the notion that this was a staged disappearance. And something that a YouTuber named Sophie Unsolved had pointed out was, it was just certain things about the layout of the house kind of led it to appear that it was staged. For starters, the investigators couldn't make perfect sense of the blood evidence, and that was one of the first things that you read about the case. It's like, I think it's even mentioned in the Wikipedia that they weren't sure how to interpret the blood evidence. Then, it's like you have someone trying to clean it up with a baby's pair of overalls, like that an infant would wear, and the telephone had a receiver that was hanging on the edge of a trash can, like that the receiver is hanging on the edge of the wastebasket. And this YouTuber named Sophie Unsolved was like, you can't physically drop a phone in the wastebasket like that and have the phone resting on the side. I always want to call it the cradle. It's the receiver, the receiver hanging on the edge like that. Someone had to have gently placed it like that. Well, for a while I thought that this YouTuber had cracked the case, and it was just like, okay, Joan staged the disappearance. And I was thinking that Joan brought beer into the house, and that she got a little bit drunk so she wouldn't feel it when she, injured herself, probably with a knife, or something, or in some way to draw blood and stage the scene. But now I'm going to tell you flat out, I'm just uncertain. And when I was discussing about this with somebody named Carla Barbosa, who's been commenting a lot, and we had a chance to correspond a lot, I would really have to say that she also brought up a very good comment about everything in this case just leads to, more mystery. I don't necessarily think that this was a staged disappearance now, and just kind of entertaining the possibility of Martin Risch's statement. Is this an example of somebody who had a miscarriage or some sort of hemorrhage, and she got so disoriented that, this caused some type of psychological trauma, and she forgot her identity? As I mentioned, the case of Benjamin Kyle. However, I do need to specify that his amnesia was the result of a direct blow to the head. I believe he had at least 2 blows to the head, and with that particular case, that seems rather obvious. Somebody stole his clothes. They killed him for his clothes and his wallet, and I believe that was some sort of, criminal who was on the run and trying to disguise themselves. So they struck him in the back of the head. But that's a whole different case. But the point is, as far as we know, Joan suffered no blow to the back of the head, and that's not really been something that's been examined by anybody. We do have, though, very extreme things that can happen to somebody after losing the blood from the amount of blood that Joan would have lost. People can have very large psychological effects, and disorientation would be paramount. That definitely makes sense. There should be a lot of disorientation going on. And, we mentioned that person who said that so they had a miscarriage and they lost their vision, which I really don't think they meant that everything went black. I think they just meant that everything got really, really blurry and intense. And, well, I just thought it was fascinating to hear that Martin Risch was saying that he believed that Joan survived this. He did not believe that she passed away. He thought that she survived and she had amnesia and wandered off to some other part of the world outside of Lincoln, Massachusetts. It is possible. It is possible, but even as I say that now, I have to share some true feelings, just sort of thinking. It also seems like it's kind of pushing beyond belief. What we do say, though, Joan's body was never recovered. We do have, the potential sightings. They aren't verified, but if she didn't fall into the construction pit and die, somebody could have, driven her somewhere, maybe to another town, and then, I don't know, though, that once you sort of say it out like that really starts to sound like you're making too many assumptions, and then it's starting to get a little more complicated. So to give some personal feelings, I think that maybe I'd say that it's possible, this amnesia thing that was put forth by Martin Risch, it's possible, but I think it's also starting to make too many assumptions. But what do you think? If you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below, and we'll hopefully be discussing the case of Joan Risch a little bit more over the next couple weeks, and from time to time some more uploads will be coming out, and if you have anything to say at all, once again, please leave a comment. Let's expand the discussion. Let's discuss things a little more. And that's all for me now. Until next time.